This is Nobody Cares. So I met this guy through my partner, and she had known him for decades. And whenever we were in the area, which really wasn't all that often, we would stop by just to say hi, and they could visit for a bit. And he was a single guy, although he'd been married at one time, but he was living alone now, and he was an alcoholic. And he had a 5-acre acreage that was nicely treed, but it was also part of a community, so he had the best of both worlds. He had the privacy of the acreage plus access to the community, which for him meant access to the liquor store. He had this old half-ton, I'm not sure what year it would have been, but it was an older model, I think a Ford, with just a single cab and a long box on it, and no plates on it. He had not had a driver's license for many, many years. And on one of the times that we stopped there, this is after he'd gotten comfortable with me, I guess, he showed us this little project that he had. And what he'd done was he'd filled the back of the half-ton, the box on the half-ton, with dirt and planted weed in it. And I don't know how many plants there were in the back of the truck, but he had them spaced out nicely, because they're going to grow and get bigger. And it was growing weed. And to me, this is just pure genius, You just have to give credit to some people. So he'd veg them up to whatever size he wanted, and then when he flipped them, what I'm going to do is say, because I'm not sure people know what flipping means, and I've used this word before in another clip and realized that maybe I should have explained. Let's say, if you're growing weed indoors, you veg the plant up, you give them lots of light, like 18 hours of light per day until you get them up to whichever size you want, and then you flip them. And what that means is you reduce the amount of light that they get down to 12 hours a day. And what that does is it tricks the plant into thinking that the season is coming to an end, the days are getting shorter, and that will encourage the plant, forces the plant into flowering or producing the buds, going to seed, okay? And so he had this old garage, and when he was ready to flip them, he would give them their 12 hours of light and then just simply back the truck into the garage and close the doors, and then get up the next day when he got up, drive the truck back out into the sunshine, give it 12 hours, and on and on and on, etc., etc. It's fucking brilliant, I think. It would be fun to speculate what it would be like in Canada if Pierre Trudeau had gone ahead and decriminalized marijuana, or for small amounts, say, similar to what the Netherlands had done. But there's really not much point in spending much time on it because he didn't do it, and so life continued on the way it was. But what you can say about it was that there's no doubt that the domestic production outdoor weed in Canada would have increased. I don't think there was very much of it back then. I know that perhaps didn't know this at the time, but stories came out later. This was at the time of the Vietnam War and all the draft dodgers from the United States coming up to Canada. A lot of them ended up staying, and some of that outdoor marijuana production was maybe not started by them, but came with them. Let's put it that way. And I don't know anything about it, really. I do know that Canada's not very well suited for growing weed outdoors. Our climate, we're just too far north. I know on the farm back in the 70s, and this was before climate change, I don't know what it is now, but we used to rely on 100 frost-free days to grow wheat. So that certainly would not have worked for cannabis. But there's places, BC in particular, and I guess the southern Ontario down in that, where it swings down into the States, London down that way, would probably have been suitable. the only seed that would have been available was that Mexican bunkweed. And so, I mean, you reap what you sow, right? And even if, and I don't remember when we learned that growing seedless, keeping the male plant away from the female, not allowing the female to be fertilized, improved the quality, noticeably improved the quality. Once the female gets fertilized, she loses interest in producing the hash and the sticky hash. But like I say, you reap what you sow, and it was such an inferior product to begin with that even going seedless would certainly have improved it, but not made some huge difference. It would have taken until, now I don't know what, say, some of these draft dodgers, what they were bringing up with them, perhaps some different seed. But it wasn't very long before the Columbian came along, and it too was seedy, perhaps not as bad as the Mexican, but definitely a better grade, way better grade of weed. And so the other problem with growing weed in Canada is, or anywhere as far as it goes, is, the fall is so important once it starts to produce the buds and trying to go to seed. If you get a wet September and no wind, you're hoot. Those buds get soaked, they don't dry out, they start to rot, and your whole year's expectations just go down the toilet. So I'll talk about the weed anyway. I grew up out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Saskatchewan, and riding the tractor all day long, listening to the radio. And actually, I've moved ahead here, I should say that. This is not the 60s now. We'll move up into the 70s here. I got out of school in 69, working off and on. I was always on the farm every year. And it would have been on the farm. It's like, what I'm trying to say here is that what was going on with the hippie generation, the free love and the anti-war, we were aware of it, like from watching the news on TV, but it just seemed like a million miles away, even though Vancouver was part of that, but Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco and the whole hippie movement and the smoking of weed. And but eventually it became like, and then the Ledane Commission report would have played a role in that too. And you hear that it's not harmful, right? And so we had to snoop around. We had no clue where to get it, my friends and I. But eventually, if you look hard enough and try hard enough, and we did find some. And let me tell you, it was complete bunk. It was total garbage. You would get just this mild little high from it. But we didn't know any, like, what are we supposed to know? This is what we got out of it, so I guess that's what you get, right? We don't know any different. There was nothing really to compare it to, not at first anyway. But, so we smoked this stuff anyway, being rebels, right? And along with all our beer. That Mexican weed was around for years, and it was quite popular. Times are changing, and people wanted to be a part of the change. And my memory's pretty good on this. It sold for $1 a gram. The wholesale price was $90. I remember that. $90 a pound. But you'd have to buy, at least 5, 10, something like that in order to get that price. And then it did go to $100 at some point. And so now you're thinking, well, that's outrageous. There's 454 grams to a pound, and you're selling it for $1 a gram and only pay $90. Well, that doesn't tell the whole story, because what you bought, it was compressed into bricks, approximately kilo-sized bricks. And when you broke those apart, it was unbelievable what you might find in there. I've seen chunks of wood, pebbles, cloth. There'd be branches in there that somehow just got stuffed in along with everything else. Nothing on them, just the branch. And, maybe it even had buds on it when it was first put in there, but it was so dry that as soon as they compressed it, everything just turned to powder. But the seeds were the big thing. There was incredible amount of seeds in there, and you just simply could not put those in a smaller bag with some powder and sell them. So you would literally discard, flush down the toilet, or just get rid of it, like 2 handfuls easily in each pound. And so once you went through all that, it wasn't, it was reasonably priced. And I should say, I almost forgot here, just because you got rid of 2 handfuls of seeds, that was by no means all of them. You couldn't get rid of all of them. There was a lot of weight there with those seeds. And so the little bags that you ended up selling were, powder and seeds. Quite a few seeds still got sold. And so in the 70s, that was the landscape. We had the bunkweed, and hashish, which was intermittent, probably showing up like late fall through the winter and the spring, and then by the following summer would dry up and be unavailable. And it stayed like that for many, many years. And I'll just mention Jamaican weed too here. Now, I've never been to Jamaica. I've never seen Jamaican weed, and obviously, therefore, I've never smoked any. But I guess it was around, and it must have been mainly just East Coast. And I should also say that, just going by my memory, is that prices remained pretty much unchanged all the way through that period in the 70s. The Mexican bunkweed being very cheap, hash very expensive, and I kind of left the impression that people would buy just 1 gram of hash. I think I left that impression, but that wasn't true. One was such a small amount. You'd sell like 1/8 of an ounce, 3.5 grams, or 1/4 ounce, something like that. The big change came in the late 70s. I just forget when. This is when the Columbian weed showed up, and it was a big change. It was so much better than the Mexican. And it too was seedy, but that just seemed normal. That's the way the Mexican was, and the Columbian weed showed up the same way. Way too many seeds. I wouldn't say that it was comparable to hashish, but to use an old cliche, the difference was like between night and day. And I'm not going to go on and on about the Columbian era, call it the era, I guess, which ran right up until the time of the indoor. It just simply supplanted the Mexican weed, and life went on. With the quality of smoke just improved a lot. And as far as price goes, my memory's not that great, really. It's not bad. You were going to pay to buy a single pound anywhere between $700 and $800. Perhaps maybe that was down at $650 at some point. That's, my memory does fail me there. But I do know that I'm not sure there was ever a mothership that I don't have any memory of a mothership being seized off the coast of Canada. Perhaps they did come up that far north. Whether that would have made a difference in the price, who knows? But I do know that if you went down to the States, and anybody who had the initiative to go down there and bring the Columbian weed across the Canadian border, that you could double your money. So seeing as how we're talking about the bunkweed, and I promised to add a little color here, and so I'll add this story in right now, even though this is the timeline I'm not sure about at all, but it's down the road. It's a couple years later than this, or a year or whatever. I don't really remember, but anyway, I was in Vancouver, and I had a friend out there. I would say friend, an acquaintance, somebody that I knew, and I had called and talked to him, and had arranged to meet him at, he had suggested 2 o'clock. I just forget exactly. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't change the story at all. We'll call it 2 o'clock. And so that was probably even like the day before, the night before. Now, he has no way of getting a hold of me. This is, we don't have cell phones. He doesn't know where I am. And so it's 2 o'clock. Can't be changed. So I arrive at my time, 2 o'clock the next day. And what had happened was he was also expecting another friend or acquaintance of his that same day who was there buying weed. And This guy had flown in from back east, but something had happened with the flight. It had got stalled or delayed. I don't really know. I don't really remember. And so his time when he was expected had changed. And I don't know whether he had had time to call and mention that things had changed or just exactly what. Long story, just shorten this up, is we both land at my friend's place, acquaintance place, at approximately the same time. And he's in a hurry. Now, he's not very happy about this initially, and rightfully so. I mean, there's protocol when it comes to this sort of thing, and his privacy and his rights on that were, I don't know how else to put it. I think you understand what I'm saying here, but it can't be changed now. And so he did actually come around and soften up to me a little bit later on. But initially, he was quite annoyed, and I would be too. He's there. He's buying 100 pounds, and so this is no small thing, right? It's not like he's buying a quarter ounce from the neighbor here, and so when he's concerned about his privilege, rightfully so. But anyway, it's too late. Things get explained. It can't be changed. I'm there. He's there. There's the three of us. And so over we go to another house. And it wasn't very far. We could have actually walked. And it's a bungalow with an attached garage. Now, the garage is quite big, but it's just a single overhead door on it. And it was quite shocking when we went in there to me, because the weed, this Mexican bunk weed, was in the garage, and it was just this big heap on the floor. It literally looked like somebody had backed up a dump truck and just raised the hoist and dumped their load. It's exactly what it looked like, except there was no room to do that. They couldn't have done that. It's just a single overhead door, right? So, however, it must have been like a big van, and they just backed it in there and just started throwing. They didn't have time to stack it up nice and neat. One or two vans. There was quite a bit of weed in there. What I remember, and this is so odd in a way, is it's Mexican bunkweed. Okay, so they do compress it down there into what are approximately kilo-sized portions, and then it's wrapped in this sort of like heavy plastic, which takes care of the smell. Or there isn't much smell anyway to begin with, which kind of tells you about the quality. And then it's wrapped in paper, just plain paper. So make these little square bundles out of it, rectangles, and the two colors, it was all different colors. The two colors that I remember were yellow and blue. Now, there may have been more, maybe a green in there. I don't really remember, but those are the two dominant colors. And this is a great big massive heap of these bundles of... and what they do, once they get all this done, that's when they weigh it. And these weights are all over the place, okay? Like this one would weigh... It'd be marked on there 1052, and the next one would be 1078, and then one that was 981 or whatever. Some were like over 1100. It was that inconsistent. So now there isn't a pot dealer that can't do the metric imperial conversion and conversions and know them inside out and backwards. Well, it is a little bit unusual with weed because it's normally by the pound and there's no conversion necessary. But in this case, because it had arrived in metric, we now have to... So what do? Well, like there's 454 grams in a pound, so that times 100, and now you start stacking and adding, right? And so I did come in. It was handy to have an extra body there to go through all this. And this guy from back east, he had three of these huge suitcases, and he's busy packing them, and he managed to get the whole 100 pounds anyway in these three suitcases, and he's in a bit of a panic. He's flying back that same afternoon. He's got his return flight. Pretty ballsy, really, doing this, I thought. But really, at that time, there was no such thing as security at the airport. You just simply walk in there, check your bags through, and got in line and climbed on the plane. And if you were a smoker, you sat at the back. There was a smoking section back there. Order a cocktail, wait for dinner to be served, and relax and fly home. And when you got there, the same thing, no security. So, but yeah, I'll never forget that day. It was a pretty ballsy thing to do, regardless, I think, of security or anything else. So, but that was a pretty impressive pile of weed. And once he got his 100 pounds out of there, yeah, sure, it got smaller, but there was still quite a whack there. And seeing as how I've told that little story, I'll just tell one more because I may never get another chance. And talking about balls, this was an American, and he had a motorhome. And this is now Columbian weed days we're talking about. So it's probably late 70s, at least, probably early 80s when it became popular and so abundant. And what he did was, we knew this guy, and I didn't think he was this nuts, but anyway, he had 100 pounds of weed. He threw it in the shower, pulled the curtain, and drove across the border. Went through customs and no problem, just drove straight across. So I'll give him the award for the craziest move I ever heard of. But the other guy, I mean, that took balls too. So anyway,